Rose Sullivan stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, pinching color into her pale cheeks as the early morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains of her modest room. The year was 1875, and in the dusty frontier town of Redemption Creek, Colorado, she had become something of a pariah, the woman no respectable man would court. "Another day," she whispered to herself, adjusting the simple brown dress that hung from her slender frame. At 24, Rose was considered well past her prime for marriage in these parts. Not that it mattered much anymore. The whispers and sideways glances had become as familiar to her as the sound of the wind whistling through the canyon. Rose had arrived in Redemption Creek 3 years prior, following the death of her father. With no family remaining in Chicago and nothing but a small inheritance to her name, she had traveled west in hopes of finding work as a schoolteacher. What she found instead was a town suspicious of educated women, especially those who spoke their mind. She secured a position at the schoolhouse, but that's where her good fortune ended. One by one, the eligible men of Redemption Creek had made their interest known, only to withdraw it just as quickly. Some claimed she was too bookish, others too independent. A few had even spread rumors that she must be barren, given her age and unmarried status. The cruelest of them suggested there must be something fundamentally wrong with her. A woman who preferred books to babies couldn't be right in the head. After the first year, the suitors stopped coming altogether. After the second, the invitations to social gatherings dwindled. Now, in her 3rd year, Rose had resigned herself to a life of solitude, finding companionship in her students and the occasional letter from a former classmate back east. Rose gathered her teaching materials and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Main Street was already bustling with activity as shopkeepers opened their doors and ranch hands made their way to the saloon for breakfast. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the whispers that followed her like shadows. "Morning, Miss Sullivan," called Mrs. Peterson from the general store. The older woman was one of the few who still treated Rose with kindness. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Indeed it is. Say, we've got some new folks in town. A cattle outfit bought the old Hargrove Ranch. Might be some new faces in your classroom soon." Rose smiled politely. "That would be lovely. The children could use some fresh perspectives. And perhaps you could use some fresh company," Mrs. Peterson added with a meaningful glance. Rose felt her cheeks warm. "I'm quite content with my books and my students, thank you." Mrs. Peterson clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "No one should be alone forever, dear. Not even the most independent of women." Rose bid the woman goodbye and continued her walk to the schoolhouse, which sat at the edge of town. She tried not to let Mrs. Peterson's words affect her, but they echoed uncomfortably in her mind. Was she truly content? Or had she simply become accustomed to rejection? The schoolhouse was empty when she arrived, the children not due for another hour. Rose lit the lamps and began writing the day's lessons on the blackboard. The familiar routine calmed her, reminding her that regardless of how the town viewed her, she was making a difference in these children's lives. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the door open. It wasn't until a deep voice spoke that she realized she was no longer alone. "Excuse me, madam. I'm looking for the schoolteacher." Rose turned, chalk still in hand, to find a tall man standing in the doorway. His broad shoulders nearly filled the frame, and the morning sun silhouetted his figure, making it difficult to discern his features. What she could see was that he wore the practical attire of a cattleman: denim pants, a simple shirt, and boots that had clearly seen many miles. "I'm the schoolteacher," she replied, setting down the chalk and brushing the dust from her hands. "Rose Sullivan." The man stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, yet strikingly handsome. Dark hair, in need of a trim, fell across his forehead, and his eyes, a startling shade of blue, regarded her with interest. "Ryker Blackwood," he introduced himself, crossing the room with confident strides. "Just bought the Hargrove place." Got 2 young ones who'll need schooling. Rose nodded, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite the unexpected flutter in her stomach. Of course. We welcome all children here. How old are they? 8 and 10. Boy and girl. They're ma past 2 years back, so they've been getting by with what I can teach them, which ain't much. He gestured to the books on her desk. Nothing like what you probably know. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Blackwood, Rose said softly. And please don't concern yourself. I'll ensure they catch up with the others. Ryker studied her for a moment, his gaze direct in a way that made Rose acutely aware of herself. Most men in town averted their eyes when speaking to her, as if her unmarried status might be contagious. Folks in town been talking about you, he said suddenly. Rose stiffened. Have they? Said you're different. Too educated for your own good. Too independent. She lifted her chin. And, do you believe everything you hear, Mr. Blackwood? A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. Never been one to put much stock in gossip, Miss Sullivan. Prefer to make up my own mind. A commendable quality, she replied, unsure whether to be offended or flattered by his directness. My children, Emma and Caleb, they'll be here tomorrow, he said, changing the subject. Wanted to make sure it was all right before sending them. Of course it's all right. That's what I'm here for. Ryker nodded, seemingly satisfied. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. Been a while since they've had a woman's influence. Might do them good, having someone like you teaching them. Before Rose could respond, he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of leather and open air. She stood motionless for several moments, replaying the encounter in her mind. There had been something different about Ryker Blackwood, something that set him apart from the other men in Redemption Creek. Perhaps it was simply that he was new, unaware of the full extent of the town's opinion of her. Or perhaps it was something more. Rose shook her head, dismissing the thought. She had learned the hard way not to read too much into a man's attention. Still, as she returned to her preparations for the day, she couldn't help but wonder about the newcomer and his children. The following morning, Rose arrived at the schoolhouse earlier than usual. She wanted to ensure everything was perfect for the Blackwood children's first day. Extra primers were set out, along with clean slates and fresh chalk. She had spent the previous evening reviewing her materials for students who might be behind in their studies. The regular students began to arrive, filling the room with their chatter and energy. Rose greeted each one warmly, keeping an eye on the door for unfamiliar faces. It wasn't until most of the children were seated that she spotted them: a tall, gangly boy and a smaller girl with long dark braids, both hanging back uncertainly at the entrance. You must be Caleb and Emma, Rose said, approaching them with a smile. I'm Miss Sullivan. Your father spoke with me yesterday. The boy, Caleb, regarded her warily. Pa said you're going to teach us reading and figures. That's right, Rose confirmed. And history, geography, and natural sciences too. There's so much to learn about the world. Emma, the younger of the two, looked up at her with wide eyes the same striking blue as her father's. Pa says you're real smart. Smarter than most men even. Rose couldn't help but laugh at the child's innocent repetition of what must have been Ryker's words. I don't know about that, but I do love learning, and I hope to share that love with all of you. She led the children to their seats, introducing them to their classmates before beginning the day's lessons. Throughout the morning, she noticed that while Caleb was reserved, answering only when directly addressed, Emma was attentive and quick to raise her hand. Both children showed signs of having received some education, though there were significant gaps in their knowledge. At midday, while the children ate their lunches in the schoolyard, Rose remained inside, reviewing her notes. She was startled by a knock at the door. Ryker Blackwood stood there, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place in the schoolhouse. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Rose assured him, setting aside her papers. The children are having their lunch. Wanted to check how Emma and Caleb are settling in. He stepped inside, his presence seeming to fill the modest room. They're doing well. Emma is quite eager to learn, and while Caleb is more reserved, I can tell he's intelligent. They both need some additional instruction in certain areas, but that's to be expected. Ryker nodded, seeming relieved. Been worried about their schooling. Ranch work keeps me busy, and there's only so much I can teach them myself. May I ask what brought you to Redemption Creek, Mr. Blackwood? Rose inquired, curious about this man who didn't seem to fit the usual mold of frontier ranchers. Looking for a fresh start, he replied simply. Been moving around since my wife died. Thought it was time to give the kids some stability. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that suggested discomfort with personal conversation. The Hargrove place was going cheap, and the land's good. Seemed like the right move. I think your children will benefit from stability, Rose said softly. Loss is difficult enough without constant change. Ryker studied her, his expression thoughtful. You speak like someone who knows something about loss. My father died 3 years ago. He was all the family I had left. Is that what brought you out here? Away from civilization. Rose smiled wryly. That and the promise of independence. Teaching positions for women are limited back east, and I wanted to make my own way. And have you? Made your own way? The question caught her off guard. Had she? Or had she simply exchanged one form of limitation for another? I'm still working on it, she admitted. Ryker's eyes held hers for a moment longer than was comfortable, then he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. Well, I appreciate you taking my kids in. If they give you any trouble, you let me know. I'm sure they'll be fine, Rose assured him. Children are remarkably resilient. As Ryker turned to leave, he paused once more. Town socials coming up this weekend. Taking the kids. Might be nice for them to see their teacher outside of school. Rose hesitated. She had stopped attending town socials months ago, tired of being the subject of whispers and pitying glances. I'm not sure if I'll be attending. Ryker's brow furrowed. Any particular reason? Let's just say I'm not the most popular figure in Redemption Creek. A look of understanding crossed his face. Because you're educated? Independent. Among other things. Ryker stepped closer, his voice lowering. Way I see it, Miss Sullivan, those aren't flaws. This town might not appreciate what they have in you, but that's their loss. Before Rose could respond, the children began filing back into the classroom, bringing their midday conversation to an end. Ryker tipped his hat to her and departed, leaving Rose to ponder his words as she resumed her teaching duties. The remainder of the week passed quickly, with Emma and Caleb becoming more comfortable in the classroom each day. Rose found herself looking forward to their questions and insights, particularly Emma's enthusiastic curiosity about the world beyond Redemption Creek. On Friday afternoon, as the children gathered their things to leave, Emma lingered behind. Miss Sullivan? The girl approached her desk hesitantly. Are you coming to the social tomorrow? Rose smiled gently. I haven't decided yet, Emma. Pa says it would be nice if you came. He says you probably don't get invited to fun things much because people here are, she lowered her voice. Narrow-minded. Rose bit back a laugh at hearing Ryker's obvious words coming from his daughter's mouth. Your father is entitled to his opinion. So will you come? Emma pressed. Please? I don't know any of the other girls yet, and Pa says he's got 2 left feet when it comes to dancing. The hope in the child's eyes made it difficult for Rose to maintain her resolve. I'll think about it, Emma. That's all I can promise. Satisfied with this response, Emma skipped out of the classroom, leaving Rose alone with her thoughts. The prospect of attending this social filled her with equal parts dread and a strange, unfamiliar anticipation. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to hope for acceptance in Redemption Creek. That evening, Rose stood before her mirror, examining the best dress. She owned a deep green affair with modest lace trim that she'd brought from Chicago and rarely had occasion to wear. She smoothed her hands over the fabric, wondering if she was making a mistake. One kind cowboy and his children didn't change the reality of her position in town. Yet something about Ryker Blackwood's direct gaze and his apparent disregard for the town's opinion gave her courage. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding, to face the whispers head-on rather than avoid them. Decision made, Rose spent the next hour preparing, arranging her auburn hair more carefully than usual and adding a touch of her precious rose water to her wrists and neck. If she was going to brave the social, she would do so with her head held high. The town hall was transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung across the ceiling and tables laden with food along the walls. A small band played in one corner, and couples already filled the makeshift dance floor. Rose hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of the conversation stopping and heads turning in her direction. She was on the verge of retreating when a small hand tugged at her skirt. "Miss Sullivan, you came." Emma beamed up at her, dressed in a pretty blue frock that matched her eyes. "Pa, look. Miss Sullivan is here." Ryker appeared behind his daughter, and Rose felt her breath catch at the sight of him. Gone were the practical ranching clothes, replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and pants that, while still simple, transformed his appearance from rugged to undeniably handsome. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted her, a smile warming his features. "Glad you decided to join us." "I was properly persuaded," Rose replied, returning Emma's smile. "It's difficult to refuse such an enthusiastic invitation." "Emma has that effect on people," Ryker acknowledged. "Caleb's over by the refreshments, likely calculating how many cookies he can take before someone notices." As if to confirm his words, Caleb glanced over from the refreshment table, offering a quick wave before returning his attention to the sweets. "Would you care for some punch?" Ryker offered. "Or perhaps something to eat?" "Punch would be lovely, thank you." As Ryker moved away to fetch their drinks, Rose became acutely aware of the stares and whispers around her. Mrs. Thornton, the banker's wife, was speaking in hushed tones to several other women, their eyes fixed disapprovingly on Rose. Emma, seemingly oblivious to the tension, chattered happily about the decorations and the music, providing Rose with a welcome distraction. When Ryker returned with their drinks, his expression suggested he had noticed the less-than-warm reception as well. "Don't mind them," he said quietly, handing Rose a cup of punch. "Small towns run on gossip. Give them time, they'll find something more interesting to talk about." "They've had 3 years," Rose replied, taking a sip of her drink. "I'm beginning to think I'll always be the subject of their disapproval." "Then they're fools," Ryker stated matter-of-factly. "Anyone who can't see your worth isn't worth your concern." His directness startled a laugh from her. "You certainly don't mince words, Mr. Blackwood." "Never seen the point," he admitted. "Life's too short for dancing around the truth." The band struck up a lively tune, and Emma tugged at her father's hand. "Pa, you promised to dance with me." Ryker looked down at his daughter with affection. "So I did. Will you excuse us, Miss Sullivan?" "Of course." Rose watched as Ryker led Emma to the dance floor, lifting her onto his boots so she could reach. The sight of the tall, strong cowboy carefully guiding his small daughter through the steps brought an unexpected warmth to Rose's chest. She was so absorbed in watching them that she didn't notice Mayor Wilson's approach until he was standing beside her. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted her, his tone suggesting surprise at her presence. "It's been some time since you've graced us with your company at a social." "Good evening, Mayor Wilson," Rose replied politely. It seemed like a pleasant night for a gathering. The mayor, a portly man with a perpetually reddened face, nodded toward Ryker and Emma. "I see you've met our newcomer. Blackwood, isn't it?" "Yes, his children attend my school." The mayor hummed noncommittally. "Bought the old Hargrove place. Paid cash, from what I hear. Mysterious sort. No one seems to know much about where he came from or what he did before arriving here." Rose sensed the mayor's fishing for information. Perhaps he simply values his privacy, Mayor. Not everyone wishes to have their life story known to all. Privacy is well and good, Miss Sullivan, but in a town like ours, a man's background matters. Especially when he's raising children. The implication that there might be something questionable about Ryker irritated Rose. Mr. Blackwood seems to be an excellent father, and his children are well behaved and eager to learn. That tells me all I need to know about his character. The mayor raised his eyebrows at her defense. Well, well. It seems our schoolteacher has taken quite an interest in the newcomer. I do hope you're not setting yourself up for disappointment, my dear. Men like that, widowers with children, they're usually looking for a mother for their offspring, not an educated woman with progressive ideas. Rose felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. If you'll excuse me, Mayor, I believe I need some fresh air. She turned and walked away before he could respond, making her way to the doors that led to the small porch outside the town hall. The cool evening air was a relief after the stuffy atmosphere inside, laden as it was with judgment and narrow-mindedness. Rose leaned against the railing, taking deep breaths to calm herself. The mayor's words shouldn't have affected her so deeply. They were no different from what she'd heard before. Yet somehow, having her interest in Ryker pointed out so bluntly and dismissed so casually, stung more than she cared to admit. Didn't take you for the type to run away. Rose startled at the sound of Ryker's voice behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from inside. I wasn't running, she defended herself. I simply needed some air. Ryker stepped onto the porch, letting the door close behind him. Saw you talking to the mayor. From your expression, it wasn't a pleasant conversation. Mayor Wilson was merely sharing his concerns about your mysterious background, Rose said dryly. Apparently, in Redemption Creek, a man who values his privacy is cause for suspicion. Ryker moved to stand beside her at the railing, his proximity causing a flutter in her stomach that she did her best to ignore. Not much mystery to me, he said after a moment. Ran a successful cattle operation in Texas. After my wife died, the place held too many memories. Sold it, took the kids, and headed north. Been working other men's ranches until I saved enough to buy my own again. You don't owe me an explanation, Mr. Blackwood. Ryker, he corrected her. And I know I don't, but I'd like you to know anyway. Rose turned to look at him, finding his gaze already fixed on her. Why? Because I'd like us to be friends at the very least. And friends know things about each other. At the very least? Rose echoed, uncertain of his meaning. Ryker's expression softened. Emma's taken quite a shine to you. Says you're the smartest person she's ever met. Emma is a sweet child. She's also a good judge of character. Takes after her mother that way. A flicker of sadness crossed his face before he continued. I've been watching you this week, Miss Sullivan. Rose, she offered, feeling bold in the darkness. Rose, he repeated, his voice warm around her name. I've been watching you, and I can't for the life of me understand why this town doesn't appreciate what they have in you. The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught her off guard. The people of Redemption Creek have certain expectations for women. I don't meet them. Their expectations are wrong, Ryker stated firmly. A woman with a mind of her own isn't something to fear. It's something to admire. Rose felt her heart quicken at his words. It had been so long since anyone had valued the very qualities that made her an outcast in this town. The mayor seems to think you'll be disappointed if you're looking for anything more than a mother for your children, she found herself saying. Ryker's laugh was low and rich. The mayor doesn't know a damn thing about what I'm looking for. And what are you looking for, Ryker? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He turned fully toward her, his blue eyes intense even in the dim light. Someone real. Someone who knows her own mind and isn't afraid to speak it. Someone who can teach my children that there's more to life than just surviving. Rose felt breathless under his gaze. That's quite a list. I'm a man who knows what he wants, Ryker replied, taking a step closer. And I'm beginning to think I might have found it. The music from inside swelled, spilling out into the night air. Rose was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from him. "Would you care to dance, Rose?" Ryker asked, extending his hand to her. "Out here? Seems as good a place as any. Better, even. No prying eyes." Rose hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Ryker drew her closer, one hand resting lightly at her waist while the other held hers. They began to move to the distant music, their steps falling naturally into rhythm. "I haven't danced in years," Rose admitted, finding it hard to focus with him so near. "You're doing just fine," Ryker assured her, his voice a low rumble that she could almost feel through their joined hands. As they moved together under the stars, Rose felt something shifting within her, a wall beginning to crumble, a hope she had long since abandoned starting to flicker back to life. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "The town will talk, you know," she said softly. "About you spending time with me." "Let them talk," Ryker replied, his hand tightening slightly on hers. "I've never much cared for other people's opinions. Even when those opinions might affect your children. Your business?" Ryker slowed their dance, looking down at her with serious eyes. "Rose, I've learned the hard way that life is too short to live by other people's rules. I won't teach my children to bow to narrow-mindedness, and I certainly won't let it dictate who I choose to spend my time with." The conviction in his voice was unmistakable, and Rose found herself believing him despite years of experience that told her to be cautious. Before she could respond, the door to the town hall opened, spilling light onto the porch. Emma's voice called out, "Are you out here?" Ryker reluctantly released Rose, stepping back as his daughter appeared in the doorway. "There you are," Emma exclaimed. "Caleb's feeling tired, and he says his stomach hurts. I think he ate too many cookies." Ryker sighed, though his expression was fond. "That boy never learns." "All right, princess. Tell him we'll head home soon." Emma nodded, then noticed Rose. "Miss Sullivan, were you and Pa dancing?" "We were enjoying the fresh air," Ryker answered smoothly. "Tell your brother I'll be right in." Once Emma had disappeared back inside, Ryker turned to Rose with an apologetic smile. "Duty calls, it seems." "Of course," Rose nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Children come first." "Always," Ryker agreed. "But this conversation isn't finished, Rose." "Not by a long shot." He reached out, briefly touching her hand. "Thank you for the dance. And for coming tonight, despite everything." Rose watched as he walked back into the town hall, her skin still tingling where his fingers had touched hers. Something had changed tonight, something significant. For the first time in years, Rose felt a flicker of possibility, a chance that perhaps her story in Redemption Creek wasn't yet fully written. As the weeks passed, Rose found herself looking forward to each school day with renewed enthusiasm. The Blackwood children continued to progress in their studies, with Emma blossoming under Rose's guidance and even the more reserved Caleb beginning to show his potential. Ryker made a habit of stopping by the schoolhouse, sometimes to check on his children's progress, other times with no apparent reason beyond sharing a few words with Rose. These brief encounters, often just minutes long, became the highlights of her days. Word spread quickly through Redemption Creek about the newcomer's apparent interest in the spinster schoolteacher. Rose heard the whispers, saw the speculative glances, but for once, she found she didn't care quite as much. Ryker's friendship, if that's what it was, had given her a newfound confidence that served as armor against the town's judgment. It was on a crisp Saturday morning in late October that Rose's routine was pleasantly interrupted. She was in her small garden behind her rented cottage, harvesting the last of her vegetables before the first frost, when the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Ryker sat atop his chestnut gelding, leading a second, smaller horse beside him. He dismounted with fluid grace, tying both horses to her fence post before approaching. "Good morning," he called, removing his hat as he neared. "Hope I'm not intruding." Rose straightened, brushing dirt from her apron. "Not at all. This is a pleasant surprise. The children are with Mrs. Peterson for the day. She offered to teach Emma some baking." Ryker's smile was warm. "Thought you might enjoy a ride. Weather's perfect for it." Rose glanced at the second horse uncertainly. "I haven't ridden in years. Not since I left Chicago." "Daisy here is gentle as they come," Ryker assured her, gesturing to the dappled mare. "And I thought you might like to see the ranch. It's coming along nicely." The invitation was tempting. Rose had been curious about the Blackwood Ranch since Ryker's arrival, and the prospect of spending time with him away from prying eyes was appealing. "I'd need to change," she said, gesturing to her gardening attire. "Take your time. I'll wait." Rose hurried inside, changing into her most practical skirt and blouse, and pinning her hair securely. When she emerged, Ryker was examining her garden, seemingly impressed by the neat rows and healthy plants. "You've got quite the green thumb," he commented as she approached. "My mother taught me. She believed every woman should know how to grow her own food, regardless of her station in life." "Smart woman," Ryker observed, helping Rose mount the mare with strong, steady hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. They rode out of town at a leisurely pace, Ryker pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his first weeks in the area. Rose found herself relaxing in his company, laughing more freely than she had in years. "So why teaching?" Ryker asked as they followed a winding trail that led toward his property. "What drew you to it?" Rose considered the question. "I've always loved learning. My father was a professor, and our home was filled with books. He encouraged my education at a time when many men thought it was wasted on daughters." "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Rose agreed, a familiar pang of loss echoing in her chest. "After my mother died, it was just the two of us. He made sure I could support myself if necessary, which proved fortunate when he passed." "And of all the places you could have gone, you chose Redemption Creek?" Rose smiled ruefully. "It wasn't my first choice, truthfully. But positions for female teachers are limited, even more so for those without connections. When I saw the advertisement, it seemed like a sign." "Do you regret it?" Ryker's question was gentle but direct. "Sometimes," Rose admitted. "But then I think of my students, the difference I hope I'm making in their lives. That makes the rest of it bearable." They crested a hill, and Rose gasped at the view that spread before them. The Blackwood Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. A substantial log house stood near a clear stream, with a newly constructed barn and corral nearby. Cattle dotted the pastures, and a thin spiral of smoke rose from the chimney. "Ryker, it's beautiful," Rose breathed. Pride was evident in his voice as he replied, "It's coming along. Still plenty to do, but it's starting to feel like home." They rode down toward the house, where Ryker helped Rose dismount before leading the horses to a water trough. "Come on, I'll show you around," he offered, guiding her toward the house. The interior was simply furnished but comfortable, with large windows that filled the rooms with light. It was clearly a home designed for a family, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a living area centered around a stone fireplace. "Emma helped choose the curtains," Ryker explained as they moved through the house. "And Caleb insisted on that shelf for his books. Your influence, I suspect." "It's wonderful," Rose said sincerely. "They're lucky to have such a home." "It's missing something, though," Ryker said, his tone shifting slightly. "Oh, what's that?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "A woman's touch. A real one, not just curtains picked by an 8-year-old. Rose's heart quickened at his words and the intensity of his gaze. "I'm sure in time you'll find someone suitable." "I already have." Ryker took a step closer. "Rose, I didn't bring you out here just to show you the ranch."
"No."
Her voice was barely above a whisper.
"No."
He reached out, taking her hand in his. I wanted to speak with you away from the town, away from their judgments and expectations. Rose stood very still, afraid to hope yet unable to stop herself. What did you want to say? That from the moment I met you, I knew you were different. Special. The kind of woman I never expected to find out here. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. The kind of woman I'd like to court properly, if she's willing. Rose stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or pity. Finding none, she still hesitated. Ryker, you should know what you're getting into. The town? I don't give a damn about the town, he interrupted firmly. I care about what you want, what you feel. I've been rejected by every eligible man in Redemption Creek, Rose confessed, needing him to understand. They found me too educated, too independent, too everything that men don't want in a wife. Then they're blind fools, Ryker stated, his free hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. Because everything they rejected is exactly what draws me to you. Rose felt tears threatening to spill. I'm afraid to believe you, she whispered. Afraid this is some cruel joke. Ryker's expression softened with understanding. Then let me prove it to you, day by day. No rushing, no pressure. Just a chance to show you that I mean every word. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper as his lips hovered near her ear. You're mine now, Rose Sullivan. If you'll have me. The words, spoken with such quiet certainty, broke something open inside her, a dam of doubt and hurt that had been building for years. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Ryker brushed it away with his thumb, his touch achingly gentle. Say yes, Rose. Say you'll let me court you properly. Yes, she breathed, hardly believing her own courage. Yes. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, brilliant and warming. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ryker leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss, so tender it made her heart ache. His hand cupped her face as if she were precious, breakable, and Rose found herself leaning into his touch, into the kiss, into the promise of something she had long since stopped hoping for. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ryker rested his forehead against hers. Been wanting to do that since the first day I walked into your schoolhouse. Rose laughed softly, a sound of wonder and joy. Even when I was covered in chalk dust? Especially then, he confirmed, pressing another quick kiss to her lips before reluctantly stepping back. Now, how about I make us some coffee, and you can tell me more about this father of yours who is wise enough to raise a daughter with a mind of her own? As they moved to the kitchen, Rose felt lighter than she had in years. She knew that challenges lay ahead: the town's gossip, the adjustment of Ryker's children to her presence in their lives, her own fears of opening her heart after so long, but for the first time, she felt she wouldn't be facing those challenges alone. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Rose could have imagined. Ryker was attentive without being possessive, respectful of her independence, while making it clear he wanted her in his life. He brought small gifts, books he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers picked along the trail to school, a handcrafted wooden box for her desk that he'd made himself during the long evenings at the ranch. More precious than the gifts, however, was the time they spent together. Ryker made a point of visiting her at the schoolhouse after classes, sometimes with his children, sometimes alone. They took rides on weekends, exploring the countryside around Redemption Creek. On Sundays, he escorted her to church, sitting proudly beside her despite the whispers and stares. Emma had embraced the developing relationship with enthusiasm, often asking Rose questions about her life before Redemption Creek and sharing her own hopes for the future. Caleb was more reserved, but Rose noticed him beginning to open up, particularly when she expressed interest in the books he was reading. The town's reaction was predictably mixed. Some, like Mrs. Peterson, seemed genuinely pleased to see Rose finding happiness. Others watched with skepticism, waiting for the relationship to falter. A few, including Mayor Wilson and his wife, made their disapproval known through pointed comments and cold shoulders. Rose found, to her surprise, that their opinions mattered less and less with each passing day. Ryker's unwavering support and the growing affection of his children provided a shield against the town's judgment. It was on a snowy December evening, with Christmas just a week away, that Ryker invited Rose to dinner at the ranch. "The children have something they want to show you," he explained when he picked her up in his wagon, bundled against the cold. The ranch house was warm and inviting when they arrived, filled with the scent of roasting meat and the sound of children's excited voices. Emma rushed to greet them, practically bouncing with anticipation. "Miss Sullivan, we've been waiting all day. Come see what we did." She pulled Rose into the living room, where a small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper chains, carved wooden ornaments, and a few precious glass baubles that must have been family heirlooms. "We made a Christmas tree for you," Emma announced proudly. "Pa says you don't have family to celebrate with, so we want you to celebrate with us." Rose felt her eyes fill with tears at the child's simple kindness. "It's beautiful, Emma. Thank you." Caleb approached more slowly, holding something behind his back. "I made this," he said, bringing forward a small wooden star, carefully painted gold. "For the top of the tree. Pa helped with the cutting, but I did the rest myself." Rose accepted the star with reverence. "It's wonderful, Caleb. Would you like to put it on the tree together?" The boy nodded, and with Ryker's help lifting him, Caleb placed the star atop the pine. The completed tree wasn't elaborate or fancy, but to Rose, it was the most beautiful Christmas decoration she had ever seen. "There's something else," Ryker said after they had admired the tree. He nodded to the children, who exchanged knowing glances before Emma took Caleb's hand. "We're going to check on dinner," Emma announced with exaggerated importance, pulling her brother toward the kitchen. Once they were alone, Ryker took Rose's hands in his. "These past 2 months have been the happiest I've known since losing Sarah," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You've brought something back to this family that I thought was gone forever." Rose squeezed his hands, emotion making it difficult to speak. "You've given me so much more, Ryker. A sense of belonging I never thought I'd find here." "I want to give you more than that," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Much more." He withdrew a small velvet box, and Rose's breath caught in her throat. Ryker opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a single pearl nestled in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Simple, but special, like what we've found together." He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Rose Sullivan, I know it hasn't been long, but I've lived enough to know when something is right. When someone is right, you're the woman I want by my side, raising my children, building a life together on this ranch. Will you marry me?" Rose stared down at him, at this strong, kind man who had seen her worth when no one else would, who valued her mind as much as her heart, who had given her a chance at the family she had stopped believing she would ever have. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Ryker. I will marry you." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms. Their kiss was deep and promising, filled with all the hopes and dreams they now shared. The sound of small feet pattering down the hallway broke them apart, and they turned to find Emma and Caleb peeking around the doorway. "Did she say yes, Pa?" Emma asked anxiously. "Is Miss Sullivan going to be our new ma?" Ryker laughed, keeping one arm around Rose's waist. "Yes to both questions, Princess. If that's all right with you too." Emma's squeal of delight was answer enough as she ran to throw her arms around Rose's waist. Caleb approached more slowly, but the small smile on his face spoke volumes. "Does this mean you'll live here with us?" he asked, looking up at Rose. "Yes, after we're married," Rose confirmed, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "If that's what you want." Caleb nodded solemnly. "You can help me with my reading, and maybe teach me about those science books you mentioned." "I would like that very much," Rose assured him, touched by his acceptance. As they moved to the dining table for their celebration dinner, Rose looked around at the three faces that had become so dear to her in such a short time. She thought of how differently her life had turned out from what she had expected when she arrived in Redemption Creek 3 years ago. How close she had come to giving up hope entirely. Ryker caught her eye across the table, his gaze warm with understanding and love. He seemed to read her thoughts, raising his glass in a quiet toast meant just for her to second chances, to unexpected joy, to the family they were becoming together. News of their engagement spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. Reactions were varied, as expected congratulations from some, shocked disbelief from others, and outright disapproval from a select few. Rose found she could face it all with equanimity now, secure in Ryker's love and their shared vision for the future. They planned a simple wedding for early spring, when the worst of winter would be past but before the demands of ranching season became too pressing. Rose continued teaching, though she had already informed the school board that the current term would be her last. She would focus on her new family and perhaps, in time, establish a small school on the ranch for neighboring children. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy with preparations and adjustments. Rose began the process of moving her belongings to the ranch, spending more time there to help the children transition to her permanent presence in their lives. She and Emma planted a garden together, planning what vegetables and flowers would grow best in the ranch's soil. With Caleb, she established a reading nook in one corner of the living room, filling it with books and comfortable cushions. Ryker watched these developments with evident satisfaction, occasionally pulling Rose aside to steal a kiss or simply hold her close, as if reassuring himself that she was real and truly his. It was during one such moment, as they stood on the porch watching the sunset after a day of preparations, that Rose broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Ryker, there's something I should tell you," she began, her voice hesitant. "Something about me that you should know before we marry." He turned to face her, concern crossing his features. "What is it, Rose?" She took a deep breath. "When I first came to Redemption Creek, one of the reasons men began to avoid me, beyond my education and independence, was a rumor that I couldn't have children, that I was barren." Ryker's brow furrowed. "And is this true?" "I don't know," Rose admitted, her eyes filling with tears. "I've never been married, never tried to have children. But there was an illness when I was younger, and the doctor warned my father it might affect my ability to bear children someday." She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I should have told you sooner. I understand if it changes things between us." "Rose," Ryker said firmly, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "Look at me." She did, finding not disappointment or anger, but the same steady love she had come to rely on. "I already have 2 wonderful children," he said softly. "If God blesses us with more, I'll be grateful. If not, our family is already perfect with you in it." "But, no buts," he interrupted gently. "I'm marrying you, Rose Sullivan. Not the possibility of more children. You." The simple acceptance in his words broke through the last of Rose's defenses, releasing tears she hadn't realized she was holding back. Ryker pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly known and loved exactly as she was. "Besides," he murmured into her hair, "if we find we want more children in our family, there are always those who need homes. We could give them one, together." Rose looked up at him in wonder. "You would consider that?" "Of course," Ryker said simply. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about love. And we have plenty of that to share." In that moment, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a husband, but a true partner, someone who would stand beside her through whatever life brought their way. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with the first wildflowers of spring dotting the meadows around Redemption Creek. Rose dressed in her cottage with the help of Mrs. Peterson and Emma, who couldn't stop exclaiming over Rose's dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "You look like a princess," Emma sighed as she carefully placed a crown of wildflowers on Rose's auburn hair. "The most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Mrs. Peterson agreed, adjusting the flowers. "That man of yours won't know what hit him." Rose smiled at her reflection, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. Gone was the resigned spinster schoolteacher, replaced by a woman on the threshold of a new life, one filled with love and possibility. The small church was surprisingly full when Rose arrived. Not everyone in town had accepted her relationship with Ryker, but it seemed curiosity had overcome disapproval for many. Or perhaps, Rose thought hopefully, they were beginning to see her differently through Ryker's eyes. Caleb was waiting outside to escort her down the aisle, taking his role as the man of honor very seriously. He offered his arm with solemn dignity, looking handsome in his new suit. "Pa's really nervous," he confided as they prepared to enter. "He dropped his boot twice this morning." Rose laughed softly. "I'm nervous too, Caleb." The boy looked up at her with earnest eyes. "You don't need to be. Pa loves you a lot. And—" He hesitated, then added quietly, "I think I might too." Rose's heart swelled at this precious admission from the reserved child. "I love you too, Caleb. Very much." As the church doors opened and the small gathering rose to their feet, Rose caught her first glimpse of Ryker standing at the altar. He was resplendent in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression as he saw her that took her breath away, a look of such naked adoration and joy that Rose felt tears pricking at her eyes. The walk down the aisle seemed both endless and too brief. When Kayla placed her hand in Ryker's, the connection between them was electric, grounding.
"Real."
"You're beautiful," Ryker whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "So are you," she whispered back, earning a brief, brilliant smile. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain in the hushed church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ryker's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their guests, Rose was struck by the realization that many of the faces looking back at them, faces that had once regarded her with suspicion or pity, now showed genuine happiness for her. Perhaps not all, but enough to make her feel, for the first time, that Redemption Creek might truly become the home she had hoped for when she arrived 3 years ago. The celebration moved to the ranch afterward, where tables had been set up in the yard and a feast prepared with the help of neighbors and friends. There was music and dancing, with Ryker holding Rose close during the slower songs and swinging her joyfully during the livelier ones. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land that was now her home, Rose found a quiet moment to stand apart and take it all in. The ranch house with smoke curling from its chimney. The barn and corrals where Ryker's growing herd would thrive. The garden she and Emma had started. The distant mountains framing it all like a painting. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Blackwood?" Ryker's voice came from behind her, followed by his arms encircling her waist. Rose leaned back against his solid chest, savoring the new name. "Not a single one, Mr. Blackwood. Just appreciating how far I've come from that lonely schoolteacher who thought she'd never belong anywhere." Ryker turned her in his arms to face him. "You belong right here," he said, placing a hand over his heart. "Always have, from the moment I saw you in that schoolhouse, chalk dust in your hair and fire in your eyes. I thought you were just another newcomer who would eventually shun me like all the rest," Rose admitted. "And now I know better." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Now I know what it means to be truly seen. Truly loved." Ryker's kiss was a seal on that truth, deep and claiming. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "The children are staying with Mrs. Peterson tonight," he murmured. Our guests will be leaving soon." The implication was clear, and Rose felt a blush rise to her cheeks despite herself. "Then perhaps we should say our goodbyes." They made their rounds together, thanking their guests for coming. As the last wagon pulled away down the drive, Ryker swept Rose into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home with a flourish that made her laugh. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the living room, now lit only by the warm glow of the fireplace. "I like the sound of that," Rose replied, suddenly shy despite the weeks of anticipation leading to this moment. Ryker seemed to sense her nervousness. "We have all the time in the world, Rose," he assured her, taking her hands in his. "Tonight and every night that follows." His patience and tenderness, as they explored their new intimacy, confirmed everything Rose had come to know about the man she had married, his strength tempered by gentleness, his passion guided by respect. In his arms, she discovered parts of herself she had never known existed, flowering under his touch like desert blooms after rain. Later, as they lay tangled together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Ryker traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. Rose propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, taking in the contentment on his face, the love in his eyes. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" "Deliriously," he confirmed, pulling her down for another kiss. "And this is just the beginning, Rose. Just the beginning of our story." As spring bloomed into summer and summer mellowed into fall, Rose settled into her new life at the Blackwood Ranch. Each day brought new joys and challenges as she adjusted to being a wife and mother, roles she had once believed would never be hers. Emma and Caleb quickly adapted to having Rose as a permanent part of their lives. Emma followed her around like a shadow, eager to learn everything from baking to reading to managing a household. Caleb was more reserved but showed his affection in quieter ways, bringing her interesting rocks he found by the stream, asking for her help with difficult words in his books, sitting beside her on the porch in companionable silence as they watched the sunset. Ryker, true to his word, proved to be a devoted husband. He valued Rose's opinions on running the ranch, consulted her about business decisions, and never treated her as anything less than an equal partner in their shared life. Their evenings together, after the children were asleep, became precious time for conversation, intimacy, and deepening the bond between them. The town's attitude toward Rose gradually shifted as well. As the wife of a successful rancher, she found herself included in social gatherings that would have excluded her before. Some of this newfound acceptance was undoubtedly superficial, but Rose discovered genuine friendships beginning to form with several of the ranch wives in the area. She established a small school on the ranch, teaching not only Emma and Caleb, but also the children of neighboring ranchers who found the town school too distant. This compromise allowed her to continue her passion for education while focusing on her family, and it brought new respect from the community for her knowledge and teaching skills. It was on a crisp October morning, almost a year after Ryker had first proposed, that Rose made a discovery that would change their lives once again. She had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks, with occasional bouts of nausea in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to the busy harvest season and the extra work of preserving food for the winter. But when she confided her symptoms to Mrs. Peterson during the older woman's visit to the ranch, the experienced matron gave her a knowing smile. "Sounds to me like you might be expecting, dear," she said gently. "When was your last monthly?" Rose stared at her, realization dawning. In the busyness of ranch life, she hadn't noticed that her courses had stopped. Counting back, she realized it had been nearly 3 months.
But I
was told I might not be able to have children," she stammered, afraid to hope. Mrs. Peterson patted her hand. "Doctors don't know everything, my dear. The body has its own wisdom, and sometimes what seems impossible becomes possible with love." That evening, after the children were asleep, Rose sat with Ryker on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they enjoyed the cool night air. Her heart was racing with the news she had to share, uncertain how he would receive it. "Ryker," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you remember what I told you before we married? About possibly not being able to have children?" He nodded, turning to look at her with concern. "Of course. Has something happened to upset you about that?" "Not upset me, no." Rose took a deep breath, then placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. I believe I'm going to have a baby." Ryker's expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby? Our baby?" Rose nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Mrs. Peterson thinks I'm about 3 months along. I hadn't dared to hope it was possible, so I didn't recognize the signs." "Oh, Rose," Ryker breathed, pulling her into his arms. This is incredible." She felt his tears mingling with hers as they held each other, overwhelmed by this unexpected blessing. When he finally pulled back to look at her, his face was alight with joy. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, searching her eyes. "I know it wasn't something we were counting on." "I'm terrified," Rose admitted honestly. "And overjoyed. And worried. And excited. All at once." Ryker laughed, the sound rich with emotion. "That sounds about right for impending parenthood." His expression grew more serious. "You know I meant what I said before. Our family was already perfect with you in it. This baby is an unexpected gift, but you were always enough, Rose. Always." The sincerity in his voice eased the last of Rose's fears. Whatever came next, they would face it together as they had faced everything since the day Ryker Blackwood walked into her classroom and saw beyond the lonely schoolteacher to the woman beneath. The news of Rose's pregnancy delighted Emma and Caleb, though in different ways. Emma was ecstatic about having a baby brother or sister to help care for, immediately beginning plans for decorating a nursery in the spare bedroom. Caleb was more thoughtful, asking practical questions about how a baby would change their family dynamics and whether Rose would still have time to help with his studies. "Nothing will change how much I love you both," Rose assured him, recognizing the insecurity behind his questions. "My heart just grows bigger to make room for the baby. It doesn't take love away from anyone else." As winter settled over the ranch, Rose's body changed with the growing life inside her. Ryker was attentive to her every need, insisting she rest more and hiring additional help for the household chores. He would often sit beside her in the evenings, his large hand gentle on her swelling belly, marveling at the occasional flutter of movement from their child. Spring brought renewal to the land and the promise of new life to the Blackwood family. Rose's confinement approached as the wildflowers began to bloom across the meadows. Mrs. Peterson came to stay at the ranch, bringing her experience as a midwife to assist when the time came. It was on a perfect May morning, with sunshine streaming through the bedroom windows, that Rose's labor began. Ryker paced anxiously outside the bedroom as Mrs. Peterson and another local woman attended to Rose inside. Emma and Caleb had been sent to a neighbor's ranch for the day, sparing them the anxiety of the waiting. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the day and into the night. Ryker, allowed occasional brief visits to Rose's side, felt helpless in the face of her pain, able only to offer words of encouragement and love. As dawn broke on a new day, the exhausted cry of a newborn finally echoed through the ranch house. Ryker, who had fallen into an uneasy doze in the hallway, jerked awake at the sound. Minutes later, Mrs. Peterson emerged, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Blackwood," she said warmly. "You have a beautiful daughter, and your wife is asking for you." Ryker entered the bedroom with reverent steps, his eyes immediately finding Rose in the bed. She looked exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. The sight of them together, his strong, remarkable wife and the tiny new life they had created, brought him to his knees beside the bed. "Rose," he whispered, unable to find other words. She smiled at him, tears of joy in her eyes. "Come meet your daughter, Ryker." He moved to sit carefully on the edge of the bed, and Rose placed the infant in his arms. The tiny face, red and wrinkled, with a dusting of dark hair across the perfect head, was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. "She's perfect," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Rose asked softly, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. Ryker considered for a moment. "How about Rebecca? It means to bind or to connect. Because she binds our family together, connects our past to our future." "Rebecca," Rose repeated, testing the name. "Ryker Blackwood. I think it's perfect." As the first light of morning filled the room, the three of them sat together in peaceful wonder, a family expanded and enriched by the miracle of new life. The journey that had begun with whispered words of belonging, "You're mine now," had led them here, to a moment of profound joy and connection. Later that day, when Emma and Caleb returned home to meet their new sister, the family gathered together on the large bed, the older children marveling at Rebecca's tiny fingers and perfect features. As Rose looked around at the faces of her husband and children, two by marriage and one by birth, she felt a sense of completion, of having found her true home and purpose. "Happy?" Ryker asked quietly, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night. Rose smiled at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "Beyond words," she replied. "This is everything I never dared to dream of, and so much more." As the years passed, the Blackwood Ranch prospered under Ryker and Rose's care. Their family grew stronger with each season, weathering the inevitable challenges of life on the frontier with resilience and love. Rebecca grew into a spirited child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's love of books. Emma blossomed into a beautiful young woman, eventually marrying the son of a neighboring rancher and settling nearby. Caleb, with Rose's encouragement, attended college in Denver, returning with knowledge that helped expand the ranch's operations. The small school Rose had established on the ranch grew into a proper schoolhouse that served children from miles around, her reputation as an excellent teacher spreading throughout the territory. Ryker's cattle business flourished, allowing them to add acreage and improve the homestead. Together, they built a legacy of hard work, education, and family values that would endure long after them. And in Redemption Creek, the story of the spinster schoolteacher and the widowed rancher became something of a legend. How Rose Sullivan, rejected by every man in town, found true love when Ryker Blackwood saw beyond the surface to the remarkable woman beneath. How his whispered claim, "You're mine now," had been not a declaration of possession, but a promise of belonging, of a shared life and a future built together. For Rose, who had once stood alone in a town full of judgment, the journey from isolation to belonging had transformed not just her life, but her understanding of herself. In Ryker's love, in their children's affection, in the community they had built around them, she had found the acceptance she had always sought, not by changing who she was, but by finding those who valued her exactly as she was. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Ryker took Rose's hand in his touch as tender as it had been in their early days together. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "that first day in your schoolhouse, when you turned around with chalk dust in your hair and fire in your eyes, I knew." "Knew what?" Rose asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That you were the one I'd been looking for without even knowing it. The woman who would make this place a home, who would love my children as her own, who would stand beside me through whatever came our way." Rose smiled, thinking of all they had weathered together, droughts and blizzards, illnesses and injuries, joys and sorrows. "And have I lived up to those expectations, Mr. Blackwood?" Ryker turned to face her, his blue eyes still capable of making her heart skip after all these years. "You've exceeded them in every way, Mrs. Blackwood. Every single day." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, there remained on the porch two people who had found in each other not just love, but a true partnership equals in heart and mind, building a life that neither could have imagined alone. And in the quiet of the evening, with the sounds of their ranch settling around them, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a lonely schoolteacher rejected by an entire town to a woman surrounded by love, respected for her mind, valued for her strength. It was a journey that had begun with a cowboy's whispered claim and had become a life beyond her wildest dreams. A life that was truly, completely her own.